Snow whipped through the empty streets of Detroit on Christmas Eve when Officer Silas Carter spotted two little girls' twins in torn pink sweaters digging through a dumpster with bare, trembling hands. Behind him, his loyal German shepherd, Valor, growled low, sensing danger as a shopkeeper stormed out with a broom, ready to strike. In that instant, Silas stepped forward, his shadow falling over the children, his voice firm and unshakable. "That's enough." He didn't know yet that this single act of protection would uncover a family's darkest secret and change all of their lives forever. The bitter wind howled through the deserted streets of Detroit on Christmas Eve, bending the glow of the lamplights into crooked halos that swayed like restless spirits in the storm. The snow came down heavy, sharp flakes carried on gusts that rattled shutters and swept over the frost-bitten pavement. Officer Silas Carter pulled his collar higher as he walked steadily through the narrow lane, his boots sinking into the uneven whiteness that blanketed the ground. At his side, his German shepherd Valor moved like a shadow given form, muscular, black and tan coat glistening with snowflakes, amber eyes glinting alert with every flicker of movement. Silas was in his early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with skin the deep shade of mahogany and a face lined with quiet sorrow. His square jaw carried the stubble of someone who no longer cared much for appearances, and his eyes dark, steady, and heavy-lidded betrayed a grief he rarely spoke of. His wife Mariah had passed 2 winters ago from an illness that crept too fast for doctors to stop, leaving him with silence where laughter used to fill the house. He had once been a man quick to smile, always the one cracking jokes in the precinct, but since her passing, he lived in a solitude broken only by Valor's companionship. The dog had been Mariah's gift to him during his days as a patrol officer, and since her death, Valor had become both partner and lifeline, his silent keeper in the darkest hours. The night pressed in heavy, and though Silas had grown accustomed to the loneliness of long shifts, something about Christmas Eve always gnawed at him. It reminded him of what was missing: the warmth of family, the glow of lights in windows, the sound of children laughing. He was headed home, determined only to make a quiet dinner and sit with Valor by the fire, when a faint rustling carried through the wind. It wasn't the shuffle of snow across pavement, but the sharp, frantic tearing of plastic. Valor's ears perked instantly, his body tensing, and he gave a low, rumbling growl in his throat. Silas paused, his gaze narrowing toward the alley beside a grocery store. Under the dim, flickering streetlight, a small figure hunched beside a dumpster, thin arms digging desperately through bags of refuse. At first glance, Silas thought it might be some stray animal scavenging for scraps. But as he took a step closer, the form sharpened against the snow's contrast. 2 forms, in fact. 2 children, no more than 6 years old, clad in sweaters far too thin for the punishing cold, their sleeves torn and their faces half hidden by tangled strands of hair plastered with snow. Their movements were jerky, frantic, as if every second mattered. The twins were mirror images of each other, yet not entirely the same. The one in front, later Silas would learn her name, was Ellie Mae, had wide brown eyes, too large for her gaunt face, and a jaw clenched with fierce determination as she tugged at a stale crust of bread lodged between broken glass. Beside her, Lila Rose crouched lower, her cheeks hollow, her lips trembling as she clutched a scrap of cardboard like it was treasure. Both wore matching pink sweaters, once bright but now dulled and frayed, threads unraveling around their elbows. Their skin was pale from cold, their knuckles red and raw, and their shoes, thin canvas sneakers, were soaked through with snow. Silas felt a sharp ache in his chest. He had seen hunger before, had seen desperation, but something about these 2 small and fragile, clinging to each other in a storm no child should endure, tore through his hardened shell. For a flicker of a moment, he thought he was staring at a memory. His own daughter, Aliyah, would have been close to their age if she had survived her birth. The thought stabbed like ice, but he forced himself back into the present. Just as he was about to step forward, a harsh voice shattered the silence. "Get out of there! Don't you dare touch my trash!" The door to the grocery store slammed open, and a man emerged, a thick-set figure in a stained apron, clutching a broom like a weapon. His face was flushed with anger, his breath steaming in the cold as he barreled toward the twins. Snow scattered under his heavy boots. With a vicious swing of the broom, he sent a spray of dirty slush toward them. Ellie Mae flinched and shielded Lila with her thin arms, pressing her sister against the cold brick wall. Her eyes widened, but she didn't cry. There was something in them that spoke of a child who had already cried too much and found tears useless. In her hand, she clutched a hardened piece of bread as though it were life itself. Before the broom could strike again, Silas's voice cut through the howl of the wind, deep and commanding. "That's enough." He stepped forward, his long frame moving with purpose. Valor surged ahead a pace, fur bristling, ears flat, a low bark tearing from his throat like a warning shot. The shopkeeper froze mid-step, eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of Silas. His police badge glinting faintly under his coat, and the powerful dog planted firmly at his side. For a tense moment, the man looked like he might challenge them, but Valor's growl deepened, reverberating against the walls of the alley. The grocer's face twisted with irritation, though his bluster faltered. "What's it to you, officer? These filthy little beggars have no business here." He spat into the snow, but his tone no longer carried the same force. Muttering curses under his breath, he turned back toward the store, flinging one last insult into the air. "Trash like them belongs in the cold." Then the door slammed shut, leaving only the echoes of his cruelty. Silas stood silent for a moment, his jaw tight, his breath fogging in the bitter air. The twins still huddled against the wall, their small bodies trembling, their eyes darting between him and the retreating figure. He knew better than to rush them. Instead, he slowly lowered himself to one knee, signaling to Valor with a subtle hand motion. The dog relaxed, ears tilting forward, tail swaying gently as he sat down, exuding calm rather than menace. "I'm not here to hurt you," Silas said softly, his voice pitched low and steady, the way he might talk to a frightened animal. "My name's Silas. This here is Valor. He's a good boy. He won't let anyone touch you again tonight." Ellie Mae's grip on the bread tightened, her knuckles white. Lila Rose's gaze flickered toward the dog, her lips parting just slightly as if in awe. Valor tilted his head, amber eyes warm, and let out a short, reassuring whine. He lowered himself to the ground, lying flat with his chin against his paws, the universal sign of non-threat. Silas reached into his coat slowly, pulling out a wrapped granola bar and a small bottle of water. He set them on the snow between himself and the children, then leaned back, giving them space. "If you're hungry, take it. No strings attached." The twins didn't move at first, their bodies stiff with the instinct of children who had learned distrust early. But when the wind picked up again, whistling cruelly through the alley and spraying snow against their faces, Lila reached forward with trembling fingers. She grabbed the bar, tore at the wrapper, and broke it in half, passing the larger piece to her sister. Silas watched quietly, something easing inside him at the way they shared even in desperation. Minutes stretched, filled only by the crunch of their small bites and the muted howl of the storm. Then Ellie Mae finally lifted her gaze, meeting Silas's eyes with a guarded intensity. Her voice was hoarse but clear enough. "Why'd you stop him?" Silas hesitated only briefly before answering. "Because no child deserves that. Not tonight, not ever." His words hung in the air, heavier than the snow. As he stood again, his hand brushing against Valor's fur, Silas knew one thing with sudden clarity. Whatever the story behind these girls, leaving them to freeze in this alley wasn't an option. Not tonight. The walk from the alley to Silas Carter's home was short in distance but heavy in weight. Snow continued to fall, blanketing Detroit's streets in silence. The storm muffled every sound except the crunch of Silas's boots and the smaller, erratic prints made by the twins. Ellie Mae, the older by minutes, held her sister's hand tightly, her thin frame bent forward as if trying to shield Lila Rose from the cold. Their pink sweaters clung, damp to their fragile bodies, and though neither spoke, their breaths came in shallow bursts that sounded more like whimpers than sighs. Valor trotted beside them, glancing back every few steps as if to reassure the girls with his steady presence, tail low but wagging slightly in the dark. Silas's house stood at the end of a narrow street lined with brick duplexes, many of them aged and weathered by time. His was modest but sturdy, A two-story structure with white paint peeling on the shutters and a porch light that cast a soft amber glow onto the snow. Inside, warmth and order lived side by side. Silas had never remarried, and so the home was quiet, furnished with the essentials of a man who had once shared life with someone and now kept the memories intact. A pair of faded curtains Mariah had sewn still framed the living room window, and her photograph hung above the fireplace, smiling faintly at a world she had left too soon. He ushered the girls through the doorway, careful not to startle them. Valor bounded ahead, shaking off snow, before lying down near the rug by the hearth. The girls paused at the threshold, their wide eyes flickering from the warm light to the unfamiliar furniture, as though stepping inside was both a dream and a threat. Silas lowered his voice. "You're safe here, just for tonight." The fireplace glowed with fresh wood as Silas stoked the flames. Ellie guided Lila to the couch, but the smaller girl's cough erupted suddenly, sharp and rasping. Silas turned quickly, noticing for the first time the flush on her cheeks and the wheeze in her chest. His instincts sharpened. This was not simply exhaustion. There was fever here. He fetched a wool blanket from the closet and wrapped it around them. When his hand brushed Ellie's arm, he felt the heat radiating from her too. Both were burning up, fragile bodies ravaged by cold and sickness. He knelt in front of them, steadying his voice though concern pressed heavy. "You're both sick. You need care." It was then he noticed what Ellie clutched fiercely in her fist. A small, frayed button, the kind that might have once belonged to a handmade dress. Its edges were worn smooth from constant holding. She held it close to her chest as if it were life itself. Layla mirrored her, pressing the same hand against the button, as if its touch alone could anchor her. Silas did not pry, only understood in silence that this scrap carried more meaning than he could yet grasp. He stood, reached for his phone on the mantel, and began to dial social services. It was the proper thing to do. Procedure demanded it when abandoned children were found. But the reaction was immediate and desperate. Ellie leapt from the couch, her voice cracking with panic. "No, please, don't call them. Don't let them take us away." Her face, usually guarded, broke open in raw fear. Lila clung to her sister's sweater, her voice trembling. "We'll be good. Just let us stay. Just a little longer." Silas froze, the phone heavy in his hand. He had seen hardened men beg less desperately for freedom. He hung up slowly, his eyes never leaving theirs. For a long breath, silence filled the room, broken only by the popping of the firewood. Then he spoke softly, firmly, as though striking an oath. "All right, just tonight. You'll stay here. No one's taking you anywhere until you're ready." The girls sagged back into the couch, tears mixing with the fever's sheen on their cheeks. Valor rose from his rug, patted over, and without hesitation laid his great head across their knees. The tension in their small shoulders loosened slightly. Ellie's hand, still trembling, brushed across Valor's fur, and for the first time that night, her lips curled into something faintly resembling relief. Silas moved into the kitchen, pulling ingredients from the pantry. The house smelled soon of broth and simmering chicken, a scent of comfort that filled every room. He set 2 steaming bowls before them, and though they hesitated at first, hunger overcame fear. They ate slowly, cautious as if expecting the food might vanish. Silas watched them from across the table, his chest heavy with a mixture of pity and a flicker of something else. Hope, fragile and new. When the soup was gone, he poured them hot cocoa, the kind he had not made in years. Lila sipped it shyly, her eyes wide as though the sweetness was foreign. Ellie whispered thanks so softly it nearly vanished into the crackling of the fire. Silas only nodded, not trusting his voice to remain steady. Hours passed. The storm outside deepened, snow piling against the porch, but inside the house warmth grew. The twins curled on a mattress Silas had pulled near the fireplace. Valor stretched beside them like a sentinel. Silas reclined on the couch, but he did not close his eyes fully. Every sound from their direction reached him, each cough, each shifting of blankets. Somewhere past midnight, their voices drifted into the room, mumbled words from fevered dreams, fragile as broken glass. "Don't leave us out there. Please, don't send us away." Silas sat up, staring at them. the words slicing into him with unbearable precision. He thought of Mariah, of the daughter they never raised, of every choice he had made to bury grief instead of face it. Something deep within him shifted that night, as though a stone long lodged in his chest had begun to crack. As the embers burned low, Silas whispered into the quiet, though the girls did not hear. I won't. Not tonight. Not ever, if I can help it. The storm had passed by morning, leaving Detroit's streets buried beneath a thick quilt of snow that sparkled beneath the pale sun. Inside Silas Carter's home, the air was still heavy from the night before. The faint smell of chicken broth lingered in the kitchen, mingling with the scent of smoke from the fireplace that had burned through the dark hours. On the mattress near the hearth, Ellie Mae and Lila Rose stirred restlessly, their cheeks still flushed from fever, but their small bodies wrapped in warmth they had not known in too long. Valor lay sprawled beside them, his head resting protectively across their legs, his chest rising in steady rhythm like a guardian's heartbeat. Silas had barely slept. He sat at the kitchen table, his dark eyes fixed on the frost-covered window, replaying the words the girls had murmured in their sleep. Please not to be cast away, not to be abandoned again. He had carried countless cases in his years as an officer, but none had pierced him quite like this. When the girls finally woke, their voices quiet, he poured them warm milk and placed it before them without a word. Ellie, the bolder of the two, glanced at him with suspicion mixed with gratitude, while Lila clutched the old button tighter, her face pale but her gaze softer when it lingered on Valor. It was during breakfast, as sunlight filtered across the worn wooden table, that Ellie began to speak. Her voice was halting, as though each word cost her something. Our mama. She was sick, coughing all the time. She couldn't work. She glanced at her sister for courage. Gerald said we couldn't stay. Vanessa laughed. They pushed us out into the snow. Lila lowered her head, her thin fingers trembling around the button. Mama tried to find help, but no one opened their door. Her voice broke into a whisper. She never woke up the next morning. Silas kept his face composed, though a storm churned inside him. He leaned forward slightly. Gerald and Vanessa, they're your family? Ellie's lips tightened. He's not our real dad. He married Mama when we were little. Vanessa came later. She hates us. Said we ruined everything. The girl's story unfolded slowly, jagged pieces of memory cutting through the air. A wealthy household, a mother's illness dismissed, a stepfather more concerned with appearances than compassion, and a woman whose cruelty was sharpened with every word. Silas absorbed it all, piecing together a truth darker than abandonment. This was no simple tragedy of poverty. It was neglect by choice, calculated and cold, by a family who wielded influence in Detroit like a weapon. Gerald Claiborne was a name Silas recognized. Late 40s, white, sharply dressed in public, known for his connections with real estate developments and for his donations to political campaigns. He carried himself as a pillar of the community, yet whispers often trailed him, deals that bent legality, favors exchanged in shadows. Vanessa Claiborne, his second wife, was younger, strikingly beautiful in photographs, with a sharp chin and pale blue eyes that never seemed to smile. She had been a socialite before her marriage, moving in circles where status was everything. To them, Silas realized children who did not fit the image were disposable. By mid-afternoon, Silas pulled on his coat. He could not ignore what he had heard. The girls watched him nervously, Ellie asking, "Are you leaving us?" He shook his head. "Number just need to ask some questions. Valor's staying here." But Valor rose immediately, ears pricked, unwilling to be parted. Silas gave in with a small nod. "All right, partner, you're coming." Their first stop was the yellow duplex 3 houses down, belonging to Mrs. Lorraine Baker, a retired nurse in her late 60s. Lorraine was a sturdy woman with salt and pepper hair tied back in a bun, her sharp eyes softened by decades of tending to others. She welcomed Silas into her kitchen, the smell of fresh bread filling the air. "I remember those girl," she said after he asked. "Saw them on the porch across the street. Their mama, Grace, I think her name was. She looked sick, real sick. One night I saw Gerald yelling at her, waving his hands like she was a nuisance. Vanessa stood there smiling. And then They put her and the children outside. In the middle of January. I wanted to help, but she trailed off, shame flickering in her gaze. By the time I gathered my courage, they were gone. Silas noted every word, his jaw tightening. Valor sat by his feet, ears twitching, sensing his rising anger. Lorraine placed a hand on his arm. Those little ones deserve better. Don't let them disappear into the system. You're the first soul I've seen care enough to ask. From there, Silas went to Harris's Market, a small grocery where the scent of oranges and old wood mingled. The owner, Samuel Harris, was a wiry man in his 70s with silver hair and eyes sharp as a hawk's. "Yeah, I saw the younger one," Harris admitted when Silas inquired. "She came in asking for bread, said her mama was too sick to come out. I gave her what I could. Always polite, that child. But Gerald and Vanessa, I knew trouble the moment I saw them. Always look down their noses at everyone. Folks around here don't cross them, though. They've got friends in high places." By dusk, Silas's notebook was filled with observations, each one a nail in the coffin of the Claibornes' false respectability. He sat in his car, Valor curled in the back seat, the weight of responsibility pressing harder than ever. These were not coincidences. They were patterns of abandonment, neglect, exploitation. His thoughts darkened as he considered the possibilities: insurance money, fraud, a convenient death. That night, as Silas typed up his notes at his desk, the phone rang. He lifted it, expecting perhaps a fellow officer. Instead, a low voice hissed across the line. "Stay out of this, Carter. It's not your fight. Walk away if you value your career, if you value your life." Then the click of disconnection. Silas sat still, the receiver heavy in his hand. His eyes shifted toward the living room where Ellie and Lila slept near the fire, Valor lying close enough to feel their warmth. He thought of Mariah again, of how she had begged him to always choose compassion in a world that too often rewarded cruelty. He set the phone down slowly, resolve hardening in his chest. If the Claibornes thought intimidation would work, they had chosen the wrong man to threaten. The courthouse in downtown Detroit loomed against the gray winter sky like an austere fortress. Snow had melted into slush on the steps, trampled by the feet of reporters, attorneys, and curious townspeople who had come to witness the case that now stirred whispers across the city. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tense anticipation, the kind that lingers before thunder breaks. Officer Silas Carter, dressed in a dark suit that fit his broad frame, stood at the plaintiff's table. His expression was steady, but his eyes carried the weight of sleepless nights. At his feet, Valor lay obediently, his powerful frame stretched across the floor like a quiet wall of reassurance. The German Shepherd wore a simple black harness, his amber eyes alert, shifting occasionally to the twins seated with a social worker behind Silas. Ellie Mae and Lila Rose, both in clean dresses that Silas had purchased days before, sat close together, their small hands interlaced. Ellie's sharp brown eyes darted nervously toward the other side of the courtroom, where Gerald and Vanessa Claiborne occupied the defense table with their attorney, Peter Hollings. Gerald, late 40s, his once athletic build softened by years of indulgence, sat back with an air of confidence, his silver cufflinks flashing under the lights. Vanessa Younger, striking in a beige-tailored suit, her blonde hair sleekly pinned, leaned forward with a polished smile that did not touch her cold blue eyes. They looked every bit the picture of refinement, but Silas had seen the rot beneath. The trial began with the first witness, Lorraine Baker, the retired nurse. She stepped forward, her sturdy frame steady despite trembling hands. Her voice carried through the room with quiet conviction as she recounted that bitter night. How she had seen Grace, frail and coughing, pushed out onto the porch with her daughters, while Gerald's voice rose in anger and Vanessa's laughter rang sharp. Gerald's attorney tried to discredit her, painting her as a lonely old woman prone to gossip, but Lorraine held firm. "I know what I saw," she said, her chin lifting. The gallery stirred, whispers rippling. Next came Dr. Emily Rowe, a physician in her mid-50s with silver-streaked hair and a crisp navy coat. Calm, deliberate, she explained that Grace's medical records revealed untreated pneumonia, a condition that, if addressed, could have been managed. "This was not inevitable," she testified, her voice clear. "Neglect and lack of care worsened her condition. Denying treatment directly contributed to her death." She spoke not with theatrics, but with the clinical authority of a woman who had spent decades at the bedside of the sick. Her words cut deeper than any flourish could. The final witness for the day was Martin Yates, a handwriting expert. Tall, thin, with round glasses perched precariously on his nose, Yates spoke with the passion of a man whose life had been dedicated to details most people overlooked. He compared Grace's authentic signature with the one on the life insurance policy. 12 points of discrepancy, he explained, pointing to the slant of the letters and the pressure marks on the page. This document is forged. He looked directly at the judge, his voice steady. There is no reasonable doubt. As the evidence piled higher, Gerald shifted uncomfortably, his smugness eroding. Vanessa, though still composed, clenched her jaw ever so slightly, a crack in the veneer. Silas felt the tension in the room shift, the balance of truth beginning to outweigh their performance. But outside the courtroom, shadows moved. That evening, while Silas prepared dinner for the twins back at his home, Valor began pacing near the door, ears pricked. Silas frowned, stepping to the porch. There, caught in the lantern light, lay a small folded note. The handwriting was shaky, familiar. Ellie spotted it before he could hide it. Her eyes widened. "It's Mama's writing." She rushed forward, tearing it open. The message read, "Ellie, Lila, come meet me by the old playground. I have pie waiting. Mama." Silas's gut tightened. It reeked of a trap. But Ellie's face lit with fragile hope, tears brimming. "She's alive. She has to be." Before Silas could stop her, Ellie dashed toward the door, Lila scrambling after. Valor barked, charging ahead to block the doorway, his body a firm barrier. The dog's growl was low but insistent, forcing Ellie to stop. Silas grabbed his coat and chased after them. The storm had returned, snow whipping through the streets as Silas followed small footprints veering toward the old playground, a place abandoned and skeletal beneath the storm's fury. His heart pounded as he spotted Ellie's small figure under the rusted swing set, clutching the note to her chest. Lila huddled close, shivering. Silas called out, his voice deep but gentle. "Ellie, stop. Think. Your mama didn't write that." Ellie shook her head violently. "You don't know. She always drew 3 dots in her hearts. She always promised pie when I was sad." Her voice cracked, desperation raw. Silas stepped closer, holding his hand out. "That's exactly why it's a trap. They know your memories. They use them against you." Valor pressed forward, barking once. Sharp and protective, his body angled toward the shadows of the street. A figure darted away, a man retreating into the blizzard. Silas knelt, his hand steady as he reached for Ellie. "You have to trust me, right now. You're not alone anymore. You don't have to chase ghosts." For a long moment, Ellie's breath shook, her small frame trembling. Then at last, she dropped the note, the paper tumbling into the snow. She stumbled into Silas's arms, clutching his coat, sobbing into his chest. Valor nosed against her side, his warm body anchoring her to the present. Back at the house, once the twins were safely bundled by the fire, Silas sat heavily on the couch, his chest tight. He realized this night had changed everything. For the first time, Ellie had chosen to run into his embrace, rather than the memory of her mother. Trust had been planted, fragile but real. He stroked Valor's head, whispering, "Good boy. You saved them tonight." Valor's amber eyes gleamed in the firelight, his tail thumping softly, as if he understood the gravity of what had passed. The final day of the trial dawned bright but brittle, the kind of winter morning where the sun glinted off snow as if the whole city were made of glass. Outside the courthouse in downtown Detroit, reporters gathered, their microphones raised, cameras clicking like insect wings. The public had followed every twist of the Claiborne scandal, and today would decide whether truth or influence held the stronger hand. Silas Carter arrived early, dressed again in his dark suit. The fabric stretched across his broad shoulders, and though his stride was firm, his eyes carried a storm's weight. At his side, Valor padded with quiet authority, his black and tan coat brushed until it gleamed. The German Shepherd had become something of a silent symbol through the proceedings, always steady, always alert. Behind them walked Ellie Mae and Lila Rose. their small frames nearly swallowed in wool coats donated by one of Silas's colleagues. The girls clutched each other's hands as they climbed the courthouse steps, and though their faces bore the wariness of children too well acquainted with cruelty, there was a glimmer now, a faint but real trust in the man leading them forward. The defense table was already occupied. Gerald Claiborne sat stiffly, his once confident smirk now gone, replaced with a jaw set so tightly the muscle twitched. His tailored suit looked expensive, but hung awkwardly on him, as though arrogance no longer fit. Vanessa Claiborne was impeccable as ever in a cream blazer and pearl earrings, her blonde hair twisted in a precise knot, her face painted with a mask of calm. Yet the tension in her pale blue eyes betrayed cracks in her polished exterior. Their attorney shuffled papers furiously, his thin lips pursed in growing frustration. Judge Wallace, a man in his early 60s with salt and pepper hair and a no-nonsense gaze, entered the chamber with the gravity of someone who had seen decades of Detroit's hardest battles play out within these walls. His presence alone hushed the courtroom. The closing arguments began. The prosecution presented the full mosaic of evidence. Lorraine Baker's testimony about the night Grace was forced into the snow with her daughters. Dr. Emily Rowe's medical report on untreated pneumonia. Martin Yates's analysis proving the insurance signature forgery. The financial documents showing insurance payouts diverted to Gerald's accounts. Each piece had built layer upon layer until the picture was undeniable. Peter Hollings, Gerald and Vanessa's attorney, attempted one last defense, painting the couple as misunderstood benefactors, victims of misinterpretation. He gestured with dramatic flair, claiming Grace had been unstable, that witnesses misremembered, that financial transactions were coincidental. His words fell hollow. Even the gallery, once filled with murmurs of doubt, now bristled with impatience. When the judge finally spoke, the silence was total. His voice was low, steady, and carried the weight of judgment. Gerald and Vanessa Claiborne, this court finds you guilty of fraud, forgery, and neglect of dependents. Your actions directly contributed to the suffering and death of Grace Harper. The law does not bend for power or wealth. You will face sentencing under full prosecution. He shifted his gaze toward Silas and the girls. Officer Silas Carter is hereby granted permanent guardianship of Ellie Mae and Lila Rose Harper. This court recognizes him as their legal guardian, effective immediately. The gavel struck once, the sound echoing like a thunderclap. Ellie gasped, her small body shaking as she turned to Lila. Both girls leapt from their seats, rushing toward Silas. Tears streamed freely as they wrapped their arms around his waist, clinging as if they feared the world might try to snatch him away. Silas bent down, his strong arms encircling them, his voice breaking for the first time. "You're safe now. I promise. You're safe." Valor circled them, tail wagging in wide sweeps, his body vibrating with energy as if he too understood the moment. The gallery erupted in murmurs. Some people clapped softly, others dabbed at their eyes. It was not just a legal victory. It was the birth of a new family. The weeks that followed carried a different rhythm. The house at the end of Silas's street, once quiet to the point of emptiness, now pulsed with life. The laughter of children mingled with the bark of valor, and the scent of meals cooked for more than one filled the air. Silas, who had once eaten in silence at the kitchen table, now sat across from Ellie and Lila as they bickered playfully over crayons, homework, or whose turn it was to pour milk. He found himself smiling without realizing it, the deep lines of grief on his face softening. One evening, after the snow had fallen fresh, Silas led the twins into the small backyard. The moon shone silver across the drifts. Ellie scooped handfuls of snow with sudden determination, shaping a mound. "We're making a snowman," she declared, her brown eyes gleaming. Lila laughed, fumbling with mittens too large, helping pat the snow into place. Valor bounded around them, his paws kicking up white sprays, his bark ringing like joy itself. Silas stood on the porch watching. A part of him still carried the heaviness of the trial, but something new replaced it now, an unshakable sense of belonging. He stepped inside briefly, returning with a small wooden frame. In it was the old button Ellie had once clutched so desperately, now polished and preserved. He hung it on the wall above the fireplace, directly beneath Mariah's photograph. It was not just a keepsake, but a bridge between memory and future, between loss and renewal. That night, as the fire crackled, Ellie and Lila curled on the couch beside Valor, their heads resting on his broad back. Silas sat across from them, the light casting his face in warm tones. For the first time in years, he felt the quietness of the house, not as emptiness, but as peace. He thought of Mariah, of her last words urging him to never stop choosing compassion. He whispered into the flames, "We're a family now, Raya. Just like you wanted." When spring finally came, the snow melting into green patches across the yard, Ellie and Lila planted small flowers near the porch. They named them after their mother, Grace. Silas knelt beside them, helping press the roots into soil, his hands steady as Valor lounged under the sun. The girls looked up at him with smiles unshadowed by fear. Silas realized then that though blood had not bound them, something greater had, love chosen, fought for, and earned. And in that moment, he allowed himself the rarest gift, a true, unguarded smile. In the end, this was never just a story about a courtroom or a verdict. It was about what happens when someone chooses to open their door and their heart, even on the coldest night of the year. Silas did not find a family through blood, but through love, through trust, and through the courage to protect two children who had nowhere else to go. And maybe that is the reminder for all of us, that the greatest families are often the ones we choose, the ones we build with kindness. What about you? If you had been in Silas's place, would you have taken Ellie and Lila in on that snowy night? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your answer might inspire someone else to act with compassion. If this story touched your heart, give the video a like and follow our channel for more stories of courage, love, and hope.